All right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the session on visualization opportunities. I'm Melanie Torrey. I'll be your session chair for the day. We're going to use Slido for questions. If you're in the room, you can also raise your hand and I'll bring the mic to you. But if you're thinking of questions during the talk, go ahead and put them in so that people can upvote them. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our first talk. It's entitled CuriFiz, Exploring New Data Physicalization Opportunities, and Forouzan is presenting. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this session. My name is Forouzan Danesand, and I'm a PhD student at Simon Fraser University from Interactive Experience Lab. And today I'll be talking about CuriFiz, Exploring New Data Physicalization Opportunities from the collaboration with Charles Perrin and Sheila Carpenter. But what is data physicalization and what is CuriFiz? Data physicalization, as Jason et al. Defines, is a physical artifact whose geometry or material properties encode data. And CuriFiz is a new type of data physicalization that we develop based on the traditional art of kirigami. Let's take a closer look at this type of data representation. Kirigami, the art of paper cutting, transforms sheets of paper into beautiful and complex three-dimensional structures. The accessibility of the material, the intrinsic interactivity, the inherent static, and possible physical variables in kirigami makes it well-suited to information visualization. Our work is motivated by the rich attributes of kirigami and also the body of research that shows data physicalizations are engaging, easy to understand, and emotionally rewarding. We name this type of data representation that sits at the intersection of kirigami and physicalization, CuriFiz. CuriFiz cut pattern is formed of alternating cut lines arranged in concentric or parallel manner. Joints refer to the locations where two cut lines are connected to each other, and loops are solid material between two cut lines. With CuriFiz, we can have both independent and dependent variables. Among all independent variables, I'll talk about the ones related to joints and loops. We can work with the number of joints as well as width of joints. Similarly, number and width of loops can vary. Changing these variables then will affect on the expansion density, expansion size, and expansion elasticity of CuriFiz, which reveals upon interactively pulling or pushing the cut pattern. Having both dependent and independent variables in CuriFiz allows us to physicalize data sets with relationships in values. To illuminate this quality as well as some other data representation and interaction possibilities of CuriFiz, we'll talk about one CuriFiz example, CO2 emission installation. In this work, we wanted to make a fair comparisons of countries' contribution. Therefore, we tried to show both total CO2 emission and per capita CO2 emission by mapping total CO2 and population to two independent variables, number of loops and number of joints. Then, as a result, the dependent variable, which is expansion amount, will show the per capita emission. We started data mapping and drawing the cut pattern by drawing one loop, having central shape identical in all countries. Then in each country, for example, in South Korea, with every 200 million tons of CO2 emission, we added one loop, which counts as which counts as 4 in South Korea with 800 million tons of CO2 emission. Then for every 10 million population, we added one joint, which counts as 4 in South Korea with 40 million population. We did the same data mapping practice for all countries, and this is the cut pattern, and this is the fabricated version. With this mapping, the overall size of each region is showing the overall CO2 emission of that part. So a viewer can easily make a cross-country comparisons and get a ballpark estimation of country's CO2 emission. Also, upon a closer examination, it is possible to count the number of loops and retrieve the exact value for total CO2 emission. The population and emission per capita reveals upon interacting with CuriFiz. The density of the texture is showing the population, Therefore, for example, in China with 1.4 billion population, the texture is 10 times denser than Russia with 140 million population. The interaction of these two variables, the size and the density, defines the amount to which each cut pattern can expand, which shows the emission per capita. Therefore, for example, in China, while we have more overall CO2 emission compared to US expands way more, showing the higher per capita in there. And also in India and China, while the population and density is similar, the minimal expansion in India shows the minimal per capita emission in there. So the viewer can have interact with different cut patterns, and through the elasticity of the pattern and the feeling of the expansion, they can understand the underlying data. To understand how people interact with this form of data physicalization, we conducted an exploratory qualitative study and observed people while they were interacting with 4 different CareerFiz examples: the CO2 emission installation, the birthday calendar, activity jewelry, and productivity coaster. We recruited 12 participants ranging from 19 to 64, and 5 were female. We prompt their exploration of data through the CareerFiz example by asking questions like retrieve a value, find extremum, sort values, and we encourage them to think aloud while they were exploring data. And after that, they took part in an interview where they talked about their overall experience working with CareerFiz. After that, we had several meetings with the whole research team and iterations of open coding, and at the end, we narrowed down to 3 overarching findings and themes: comprehension, interaction, and CareerFiz in context. We will just talk about some highlights from comprehension and interaction. Please see paper for full findings. Engaging with their first CareerFiz, all participants showed some positive reactions. For example, they said, very cool expansion texture. It feels satisfying to hold and expand. Also, this study allowed us to see how people understand different CareerFiz variables. We understood while they need some initial learning, after that, the variables are readily understandable. For example, P1 said, they are kind of easy to understand once you get the mapping right. About the interaction, all the participants enjoyed the interaction possibilities of CareerFiz and said that it helped them to discover meaning and kept them engaged. They used expressions like triggers my curiosity, intriguing data representation. For instance, P9 said, I think it's kind of like a puzzle. I like doing puzzle and trying to figure things out. I feel curious and I can focus on it maybe more easily because I'm trying to figure things out step by step. The elasticity of expansion was mentioned as the most distinguished variable, and people used that to analyze data and compare different cut patterns with each other. For instance, P10 said, through the interaction, I had a sense of the weeks based on the expansion density and resistance. Counting just helped me to verify my feelings. Participants also mentioned that the variables are not at the same level of their awareness and gradually appears to them. For example, P11 said, it's like peeling back layers and saying, oh, here is another variable. CareerFiz opens up a wide design possibilities to physicalization designers. It is potentially inexpensive and portable with the use of 2D material and common cutting tools. Also, wide range of scales can be covered and have representational possibilities in wide range of scales, from jewelry pieces to wall installations and even architectural scale. Similarly, wide range of material is open to the physicalization designer, from paper in different colors and materials and colors and thicknesses to sheets of aluminum or other metal sheets. Depending on purpose and context, variety of shapes and configurations are open for physicalization designers. In terms of interaction, wide range of interaction is possible, from non-technical queries to ones which are technology-based. We hope that this work will inspire the future design of data physicalization and more intriguing and interesting data representation to engage people. Thank you. I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Firuzan. So there are a couple of questions already in Slido. Please go ahead and ask more in there. So one question from Joe is, are the structures fragile? Could fragility be a variable that you manipulate to encode in a cut?
That's a very interesting question. So less than half of the participants at the very beginning were hesitated to expand the cut patterns because they thought it is fragile. But in the design, especially if you use higher thickness in paper or plastic-based papers, it is not gonna tear, so people can be they can expand it. And they were surprised when we encouraged them to expand it to the highest amount, and then they saw how much it can expand. So it seems to be fragile, but it is not. And that's a surprise for people.
Hello.
And perhaps one more question from Slido. Wolfgang Agner says, very nice work. What are your experiences of users understanding the data mapping? Is the mapping explained, for example, by accompanying text?
Mm-hmm. So about the variables and how people understood it, the elasticity of expansion, the feeling that the participant, while they were expanding different cut patterns, some of them were harder to expand, some of them were springier. So these kind of feelings, they gradually get familiar with that and use that to understand the data behind it. So this was one of the most distinguished variables people use. Apart from that, the number of loops, number of joins, these were the one people evaluated to be readily understandable.
All right. There are many more questions, but we will put those into Discord and ask you to answer them offline.
Of course. Thank you.
Let's thank our speaker again. Okay, next up we have a virtual talk on supporting expressive and faithful pictorial visualization design with visual style transfer. Our speaker is Yang Shi, and this paper was awarded an honorable mention award. So let's just give a round of applause for this paper. Can we roll the video?
Hello, I'm Yang Shi from Intelligent Big Data Visualization Lab, Tongji University. I'll be presenting our work, supporting expressive and faithful pictorial visualization design with visual style transfer. This work is in collaboration with Pei Liu, Siji Chen, Mengdi Sun, and Professor Nan Cao. Pictorial visualization is a visual representation of data. It uses icon-based language to visualize otherwise abstract data points or data facts. It has been increasingly incorporated into narrative visualization such as data videos and infographics to support data-driven storytelling for the general public. However, creating pictorial visualizations is a challenging task, even for experienced information designers. To facilitate pictorial visualization design, various data-driven design support tools have been proposed. However, these methods are restricted to certain data types such as proportional or temporal facts. Moreover, they constrain the visualization type being used in examples to be identical with that in results. Such an approach may reduce the expressiveness and flexibility of pictorial visualization design. To bridge such a gap, we leveraged a concept derived from the field of artificial intelligence, style transfer, to separate and recombine visual style and data content, enabling a more extensible approach to crafting pictorial visualizations. Built on the concept of style transfer, we developed a design support tool called vStylist. As a user uploads a source pictorial visualization collected from online sources, VStylist can automatically extract its visual style and transfer the style to an intended pictorial visualization. Let's see a demo. Initially, a user uploads an example to the design panel. VStylist automatically segments its visual elements. Then she uploads an obesity dataset to the data panel and clicks the generation button to check the result on the canvas. She can adjust the icon and color of the visualization. Also, VStylist shows alternative designs in the suggestion panel. Our system was developed to address a set of design requirements we had derived from the interviews with domain experts. In the following, I'll explain each design requirement in detail. First, we identified a set of design patterns of pictorial visualization to guide automatic generation. These design patterns can be described as a function of 6 visualization types and 7 data binding types, and were identified by analyzing a dataset of more than 1,000 pictorial visualizations we collected. The dataset can be accessed through the following link. The user interface of VStylist shows only the 6 visualization tabs in the data panel and hides data binding types from users. As a user selects a specific visualization type and field channel mapping, our system can automatically suggest data binding types. Second, VStylist decomposed a source pictorial visualization into visual elements that characterize its style. To perform element extraction, we applied one of the state-of-the-art object detection methods proposed by Liu et al. Their method can distinguish between 4 categories of data elements of infographics, including text, icon, indexed, and arrow. After successfully detaching the identified elements from the source, we extracted their features, including color, font, and icon. Third, to generate an intended pictorial visualization, VStylist performs a 3-step procedure. First, drafting a pictorial visualization based on the dataset, selected visualization type and suggested data binding type. Second, automatically retrieving icons that are semantically associated with the selected data attributes. Third, transferring the extracted visual style to the intended pictorial visualization. VStylist can also suggest alternative designs of pictorial visualizations based on 3 criteria, including similarity, aesthetics, and inspiration to help design ideation. Specifically, similarity measures the results by comparing them with the source pictorial visualization, and the most similar one amongst the results is ranked the highest. Aesthetics evaluates the results from the perspectives of color and layout, while inspiration provides design alternatives by suggesting different visualization and data binding types. In our evaluation, we estimated the usability and usefulness of VStylist through a survey of example pictorial visualizations, a controlled user study, and a series of expert interviews. In the survey, the participants were presented with groups of pictorial visualizations generated by VStylist and retrieved and adapted respectively. In each group, they were asked to compare the resulting pictorial visualizations with the source and rate the quality of the results using a 5-point Likert scale. The results showed that VStylist performs significantly better than RTA in terms of consistency, expressiveness, flexibility, individuality, and inspiration. In the user study, the participants were asked to use VStylist to create pictorial visualizations based on the given sources and fill out a questionnaire. In the expert interview, the experts were asked to create pictorial visualizations with Stylist first, and then use the results to create infographics with graphics editors they prefer. That ends my presentation. Thank you for your attention. Hello, I'm Yang Shi.
All right. Are there any questions for Yangshi? Well, while we're waiting for them to come into Slido, I can ask one. I'm curious whether style transfer can introduce any ethical issues like plagiarism, for example, and if so, how you might mitigate that.
Yes. I think it may raise ethical issues. For example, if the source design and icon assets are uniquely related to an individual designer style, one possible concern is that abuse of style transfer to impersonate the work of other designers, and allowing directly imitating the style of existing visualizations can also be harmful. For example, if style transfer is used by some bad actors to generate misleading information graphics that have the visual. Sorry?
Yeah, go ahead. We hear you.
Oh, let me reconnect. For example, if the style transfer is used by some bad actors to generate misleading information graphics that have the visual appearance of a reputable source, such as New York Times, that could be harmful. So unfortunately, we don't have any good solutions right now to address the issue. But we can imagine that in the future, we may have artificial moral agents to detect plagiarism in the context of visualization design to protect and preserve the moral and material rights of both parties, especially if such plagiarism is unintentional. For example, such agents can warn users of the materials involved in the risk of plagiarism to avoid such potential risks. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question from Wolfgang. Did you want to ask it live?
Thank you. So my question would be related to, in this process, do you create also some kind of style files that you can apply to other graphics as well, like a CSS style file or something like that?
Thank you for your question. In this process, we create some style files, but not in some CSS formats. Our style formats include some color and font, and also the style of icons. So when we extracted the style of the examples, we will transfer the style to an intended pictorial visualization.
Okay, thank you. We need to move on, but let's thank our speaker again.
Thank you.
So next up, we have another virtual talk. This one's entitled Self-Supervised Color Concept Association via Image Colorization. And our speaker is Ziki Yi and Ruxian Hu.
Hi, I'm Ye Ziqi from Shenzhen University. I'm glad to have the chance to present our work, Self-Supervised Color Concept Association via Image Colorization. Here is the agenda of my presentation. I will first make a brief introduction of Color Concept Association and the previous works. Then I will introduce our self-supervised method, including a colorization module and a color mapping module. Then follows the evaluation and the results section, and at the last, the conclusion. Suitable associations between colors and concepts are important to facilitate semantic interpretation of visualizations. However, manually creating a dataset of suitable associations between colors and concepts for use in visualizations is costly, as it requires collections from humans for a large variety of concepts. Therefore, automatic extraction methods are required. The common idea is to collect color concept associations from images. The existing methods are supervised, which train models to extract associations from manually labeled data. In this work, we introduce a self-supervised method for extracting color concept associations from natural images. Our main idea is to extract associations from the model learned by a colorization neural network. The network is trained to assign colors to the pixels of grayscale images, and thus learn how to associate colors to certain categories of objects. Therefore, our method does not require the preparation of human-labeled color concept associations. Our method includes an image colorization module and a color mapping module. In the following section, I will introduce these two modules in detail. For each given concept, we collect a set of images from the search engine, which are used for the training of the image colorization network. We perform the colorization task in the perceptual CIE lab color space. The goal of this module is to take the L channel of an image as input and predict a distribution of possible colors instead of a single deterministic color for each pixel, so that we can codify color concept associations over a large range of colors. As the L channel is already given as input, we only need to predict the probability map over the AB color space. We quantize the AB space into 313 bins, so that the output of the network is a 313-dimensional vector of each pixel. To define the training data for the network, we convert the ground truth color image into a quantized AB probability distribution by using a soft encoding scheme. More specifically, for each pixel, we find the 5 nearest neighbors in the quantized AB space and its lightness, and then weight them proportionally to their distance from the ground truth. The loss function of network is the multinomial cross-entropy loss between the predicted probability distribution and the ground truth probability distribution. After training, the image colorization module produces pixel-wise probability map on AB color space for each grayscale image. Together with the original lightness channel, we can get a predict 313-dimensional lab color distribution for each pixel. We then derive the association of color concepts from all the probability distributions. That's to say, map and aggregate the predicted color distributions into a given color library space. This process is conducted by the color mapping module. Details as follows. For each pixel with 313 colors, each color CI has a predicted probability PI. Given a color library CJ with several colors, we first compute the color distance Dij in CIE lab space between CI and all colors in the library. Then, a weight map omega ij is derived based on the color distance for CI to CJ. The more similar two colors are, the higher the weight. Finally, we weight the probability PI by omega ij and get a pixel-wise color rating. This process is conducted for each pixel of the concept image, and the results are aggregated to form the image-wise color rating. For a given concept, color concept associations are obtained by aggregating color ratings extracted from a set of images. Here are examples for concept: blueberry, corn, and grass. The associations are extracted from nature images with a self-supervised manner. In the following section, I will introduce our quantitative analysis and show some results. To evaluate our method, we collect 4 datasets with ground truth color concept associations. They cover 28 concepts in total, and the ground truth associations are defined on different color libraries. To quantitatively evaluate the results, we use 4 metrics to evaluate the differences between the estimated associations and the ground truth. They are correlation, total variation, TV, Earth movers distance, EMD, and entropy distance, ED. It's worth mentioning that the metric correlation assesses the relative pattern of association, while EMD and ED better captures the perceptual similarity between associations. Please refer to our paper for more details. We compare our method to the state-of-art supervised method on these datasets with the 4 evaluation metrics. Here is the overall results. According to the results, the supervised method performs better on the correlation metric. Only recycling 6 dataset outperforms the results of the supervised method, which indicates that they have a higher linear correlation with the ground truth rating. The TV scores of the 2 methods are comparable, while our method obtains overall better results according to the EMD and ED metrics, which consider the scale of association with a given concept and are more consistent with human perception. We show several visual examples of the predict color concept associations compared to the ground truth rating and the corresponding values of different evaluation metrics. For the results shown in the first 3 rows, the correlations of the results obtained by the supervised methods are always higher than our method. Although the distributions obtained by our method are perceptually more similar to the ground truth distributions shown on the right, it can be seen that the EMD and ED metrics better capture these differences. We further conduct a user study to compare the result based on human perception. For each concept in our dataset, we show the ground truth user rating together with the 2 estimated ratings obtained by our methods and the supervised methods, Rosso et al., in random order, and ask the user to select which results they think is more similar to the ground truth user rating. The user can select either one of the 2 results or a no-sure option. We invited 13 participants to do the study for all 28 concepts in our dataset, which results in 814 answers in total. The vote percentages for the options ours, the supervised methods, and the no-sure are 17.5%, 16.9%, and 12.6%. In this work, we introduce a self-supervised method for extracting color concept associations from datasets of natural images via colorization. Through 4 evaluation metrics and a user study, we show that our method is competitive with the state-of-art supervised method, while our results are more consistent with human perception. As for limitations, first is that our results are entirely determined by the data. Since our method is self-supervised, a lack of variety in the imagery can lead to failure cases. Moreover, although our results are perceptually better, the supervised method has better ability of capturing relative patterns of the associations. It would be interesting to explore ways handling both relative association and ridge well. Last but not least, it's hard to produce reasonable results for abstract concepts, which do not have symmetrically resonant visual representations. One possible solution could be automatic selection or even generation of images for abstract concepts. Thank you for listening. For more details, please refer to our paper. Hi.
Thank you. Okay, so we have some questions raised in Slido. The first question comes from Vidya, and she asks, how does your algorithm handle color concepts with ambiguous colors? For example, the word apple could refer to the company logo or to the fruit.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
In fact, the result is depending on the images we collect. So if in this case, you should constrain the condition when you search the images.
Okay, great. Thank you. So next question is, some color concepts are dominated by L star, think yellows versus browns. How does your algorithm manage that given the emphasis on AB in your models?
In fact, we don't think that can affect because the goal of our algorithm is to find the connection, find the association between the concept, and so the input is full colored images. So we don't think any of the blocking of any of the channel can affect that, but we can see maybe we can have a test on that and using different channels to have a test. But that's a good question. We could have a try on that.
Excellent, thank you. There are more questions, but we're going to need to move on, so please look to Discord to answer those. Let's thank our speaker again. So for our next talk, we welcome Sandra, who will be speaking about cultivating visualization literacy for children through curiosity and play.
Alrighty, thank you all for joining. So as we know, visualizations are not just meant for domain experts anymore. They play a critical role in our society where we even see them in popular media, such as journal articles, games, news, and etc. And so to push for a more data literate society, fostering DVL or data visualization literacy as part of childhood education, it seems promising. So how do we introduce and teach visualization to young children, and how can that method be sustained? If we look at the landscape, data education, like math, is currently dominant in formal learning settings. However, to quote Paul Lockhart, who is a well-known mathematics educator, this formal learning setting often ropes children into constrained exercises that, quote, suck the life out of math. And to a degree, I have a similar fear as Lockhart in terms of how visualizations are commonly taught to young children. And in a sense, our proposed solution to combat this is data is yours. And if we look at this picture right here, data is yours seems quite simple. It's a toolkit made from everyday materials that we're very familiar with, like cardboard, papers, mirrors, and etc. But despite its simple use of the materials, it actually enables children to gain agency, playfully author visualizations, and in turn cultivate their visualization literacy. Data is yours sits with other prior works that focuses on improving children's DVL. But the majority of existing DVL tools focus on using predefined data sets that are either actively guided by an educator or through gamification approaches such as the selected work here. And while these approaches enable teachers or the system to provide guidance and feedback, it largely limits children's engagement, data engagement to just either classrooms again or predefined data sets. So a thread of work that I would like to highlight in contrast to the previous approaches is where children work with data sets and they're building data-driven artifacts that they think are important. And Scratch community blocks and data sculptures really exemplify this. Scratch community blocks and data sculptures follow a school of thought called the constructionist theory, and which is pioneered by Seymour Papert. And as Papert best puts it, students learn best when they build artifacts that are personally relevant and meaningful to them, driven by their play and curiosity. And so to understand how to best support constructionist practices for within a visualization context, we derived a set of design goals through a formative investigation with educators and children. In essence, the probe should be approachable to children, provide children an engaging experience when they're building visualizations, and lastly, support scaffolding and embodied learning. And so through these design goals, Data is Yours builds upon past scholarship and supports constructionist practices. It helps cultivate children's DVL in a playful manner, but compared to past work, it still affords physical construction while still leveraging computational capabilities. So our research contribution focuses on using Data is Yours as a design probe to conduct an exploratory study with young children and educators. We investigated how constructionist practices can foster children's comfort and familiarity, and we learned that this approach can be integrated with existing informal activities that children naturally enjoy. But before diving into the study and its results, I'll describe more of the toolkit and how it's intended to work. So the toolkit is broken up into physical components and a digital component, which consists of a mobile device for digital interactions. The toolkit currently supports 3 visualizations, the most common, bar, line, and pie, and at the front of each chart is a paper template which subtly scaffolds children about different visualization elements that they should consider, like axis labels and titles, while still acting like a blank canvas for children to express their creativity. And the physical and digital aspects of the toolkit are connected by the use of fiducial markers, which are behind each chart panel, as you can see here. And so these chart panels are placed at an angle on top of the box structure, and we can detect the markers through the reflection of the mirrors, which the smartphone's rear camera captures. And by interacting with the chart panels, we can start to detect changes in marker position or orientation to enable a wide variety of tangible interactions, such as the one we're seeing here. And we use this digital and physical approach to promote embodied learning, that children can physically craft and interact with visual marks through the physical charts, which are connected to responsive digital copies that our children are likely to see in the real world. And so this multimodal configuration paradigm really allows children to leverage the cognitive benefits of physically crafting with materials with the common digital visualizations. Additionally, this multimodality starts to leverage the computational benefits, such as quote-unquote scanning, which is the paper templates, to have them reflected on the actual digital visualization. And the scanning mechanism enables children to freely author visualizations of their choice as such. So now I'll explain more of our exploratory study, which was a series of workshops with children and interviews with educators. So for the sake of time, details about the investigation with educators we found in the paper, so please check it out. But for the children, we hosted an interactive 2-hour workshop, which I will now briefly describe. So as a quick overview, children were first given a packet of the toolkit components that they were instructed to assemble by themselves. They generated their own data by playing a game and then authored visualizations to match their collected data using our toolkit. And for more details about this methodology, please refer to the paper. So we qualitatively analyzed the materials from the workshop and using content analysis, and overall, children found that the physical crafting for visualization useful. But that utility really differed based on the children's personal age and also prior knowledge of the data visualization. For instance, older children viewed the toolkit as primarily as a platform to create visualizations with more agency compared to digital tools that they were regularly introduced to, like Google Sheets. Whereas for the younger children, physical crafting eased them into data visualization through experimentation and play. So just one small example, children ripped paper templates while they were filling them out, but because they knew it was simply paper, they were willing to try again through this experimentation. Similarly, when they were assembling the cardboard base, children were very curious as to why certain components or features were necessary through the assembly process. We also observed that the toolkit supported children's creativity. Children really enjoyed decorating their toolbox, as you can see in the top row picture right there. But this creative expression was not just limited to the toolkit on its own, but also how they described their visualization. If we look at the bottom row picture right here, we can see a paper template, but this one child drew a series of icons and a combination of icons and text to indicate the different game conditions they were participating in when authoring a bar chart. And lastly, we also saw that the physical interaction did support children's embodied learning as we have hypothesized. P2, for example, was one of the prior one of the younger children who had little prior knowledge of visualizations when she first started the workshop. And it's digital. She noticed how she was able to draw parallels of the paper strips on the physical chart to match the digital heights of the bar chart on the digital visualization. So I'll be now quickly discussing how we envision others to make use of our investigation. So before we discuss the deeper insights, I want to highlight the immediate opportunities extracted from this study. Our study highlights that children can creatively engage with data, but to really demonstrate pedagogical evidence, it needs to be more than one single session of a workshop, obviously. And it also needs to be tightly integrated into children's everyday context. In addition, we currently lack formal assessments that are appropriate for children to determine what they've actually learned. Existing standardized tests such as VLAT target adults, and further efforts are needed for more formal measurement. So to quickly wrap up, I would like to summarize that we use Data is Yours as a design probe to conduct an exploratory study with young children, and we investigated how constructionist practices can foster children's comfort and familiarity with visualization. And our study confirms the need that we as a research community need to further investigate how to expand that children can interact with data and visualizations found in their everyday lives. We open sourced the toolkit to encourage children, parents, and educators to adopt and fabricate the toolkit on their own, so please check it out. And with that, I'd like to thank my co-authors on this paper, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, the first question comes from Vidya Settler, and she asks, did you explore social and group dynamics during this embodied learning? For example, more dominant learners may be at an advantage compared to the more quiet, introverted learners.
That's a really interesting question. That was not one of the variables that we were studying, but obviously it is something that will come up in a natural group setting like a workshop. But I do also want to note that in these workshops, we did not explicitly tell children to work together. If anything, children naturally just started to cluster amongst themselves and work together. So that was some interesting observations that we found.
Great. And Wolfgang asks, how much does the limitation to 3 chart types constrain the learning? How does this compare to more open-ended, free-form, token-based approaches such as constructive viz?
That's also a great question. So we focus on these, the bar, line, and pie because they're the most common visualization representation. And while the latter approach that the question raised is more appropriate for data mapping, but we were interested in see how we can improve visualization literacy. So if they see a visualization in the real world, can they understand it and make a meaning out of it? So that's hence our approach.
Excellent, thank you very much. All right, our next speaker is Elsie, and she'll be presenting her paper on RoboViz, a game-centered project for InfoViz education.
Welcome to Planet X, where student teams collect robots through a visualization system they build as their final project. I'm Elsie Lee Robbins, and I'm here to present joint work with Eitan Adar on RoboViz. Final projects, which are often open-ended, are a core part of most InfoViz courses. We have surveyed many such courses and have found final projects to be ubiquitous. RoboViz is an alternative to traditional final projects in information visualization courses. RoboViz is a game-driven visualization project we built for students in our InfoViz course. We've been running a version of it in our graduate course for 2 years with nearly 100 students. Final projects are a great idea. They allow students, usually in teams, to practice and develop their practical information visualization skills. They also give the instructors a way to assess learning objectives. What motivated us to move away from more traditional open-ended projects is that they often focus on what we call visualization adjacent skills. These are parts of the process that are important, but not necessarily a key part of a visualization curriculum. Usually, teams have to find a good client or problem, collect data, clean it, determine tasks, and only then actually build the visualizations. If they get lucky, the first parts of this process are relatively easy. Students can concentrate on building the visualizations. We, as instructors, get to evaluate how well students learned InfoVis theories and how well we taught them. If students get unlucky, they may spend all of their time trying to isolate or clean the data, find tasks, and so on. The result is they really haven't leveraged what we teach them about InfoVis. These final projects might have a substantial amount of visualization adjacent tasks. We can't guarantee that they'll have an interesting data set, good tasks, or a wicked design problem that actually challenges them. Even if one team gets lucky, others won't, and the result is unequal learning and assessment. I don't have time to go through the full details, but you can read more about our broader course objectives in our paper. To achieve these objectives, we created RoboVis. Students spend the first 7 to 8 weeks of class learning theories of visualization, seeing examples, and learning how to implement them. After this, we challenge them to build a visualization system for real-time gameplay. While students don't actually have to compete, we offer a tournament at the end of the semester for students to test their creations. By design, RoboVis has a somewhat complex set of rules and data elements. These force teams to trade off different strategies and make hard decisions about which visualizations they actually want to implement. Teams of 3 to 5, which is our usual team size, can't really build a solution that does everything. The full details and strategies of RoboVis are in the paper, but here's the rough idea. 2 teams land on Planet X and are tasked with recruiting robots left on the planet by a past mission. The 100 robots left on the planet have different levels of productivity in mining the resources of Planet X. Teams have 100 Planet X time units, which is 10 Earth minutes, to recruit the set of robots into their team. The team that collected the group with the highest productivity wins. The students are told that the robots had previously been abandoned and want to make sure that they only join a team that's on the same wavelength as they are. To determine this, each robot plays a guessing game with the 2 teams. We call this the friendship game. The robot thinks of a number, and teams have to guess that number by a certain time in the game. For example, Pushwalker Botson, or Robot 52, may be thinking of the number 34 at time unit 73. The number generators aren't random. They may be something like a 4th-degree polynomial. If teams can somehow collect samples from this distribution, they will be able to make a better guess for a robot. This is where things get exciting, and we can start to add strategies and data types to make the visualizations more interesting. For example, we tell teams that robots have a social network, and when 2 teams guess something really similar in the friendship game, a robot will look to its friends. A robot will change its decision based on its friends, and the more popular the friend, the more influence they will have. Finally, remember that we said robots have different levels of productivity. In fact, some may have negative productivity. To determine this, we tell the students that robots are composed of parts, some quantitative, some categorical, that all contribute to productivity. If a team can determine a robot's part value and the correlation of those to productivity, they can focus on better robots. Teams are given some data at the start, and the rest comes to them over time, causing them to change their strategies. Every 6 seconds, teams can ask a hacker living on the planet to give them some information about robots and their parts. Some of the data returned is random, and some can be directed by the team. For example, a team might focus on robots that might need a guest soon or have a high influence in the social network. Each 10-minute match is completely different from the previous one. New social networks, new correlations, new time series. A good visualization needs to support many different instances of a game. A strategy that worked well before might need to change, and that's part of the challenge for teams. Teams are required to make decisions based only on what they see in the visualization. A good design will allow a team to decide which strategy to emphasize, what to guess, when to do it, and what to ask the hacker. To get teams started, we give them a simulated game server, some API code in Python and JavaScript, and a simulated opponent they can extend. At the end of the semester, we let teams play a knockout-style tournament over a couple of days. Again, this is optional, and teams can earn a tiny amount of extra credit for playing well, but not enough for influencing their grades. We've run the game for 2 semesters with 10 to 11 teams each time, and the results have been highly encouraging. Our grading rubric, which is also available in our supplementary materials, is aligned with our learning objectives. Most teams score full points for aesthetics, justification, and functionality. We find that the largest deductions were due to interactivity features and suboptimal design choices, or failing to remove parts of their visualization that weren't actually helpful. A secondary benefit of the rubric was that it allowed us to identify limitations in our teaching and change the course. The result we are most excited about, however, is the diversity of visualization types created by each team. In the past, it was unlikely that a project would have a network, multivariate, hierarchical, and temporal components all at once. Specific distributions and examples for these visualizations are available in the paper, but here are a few examples of visualizations created by student teams. We view RoboViz as overall positive in meeting learning objectives and giving us the ability to provide assessments. However, we recognize that we are applying a specific learning philosophy that comes at some cost of realism and responsiveness to student interests, or that lead to certain kinds of visualization designs. In the paper, we propose some ways around this depending on instructor needs. We are delighted to open source the tool to any instructor who wants to try it in their class and hope that others try this approach in their classes. Feel free to reach out with any questions. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions in the room? Maybe I can ask one to get us started. What did the students think of RoboViz? Yeah, so we didn't actually do like a formal evaluation, but anecdotally, we found that a lot of the students liked it, and a lot of them did participate in that knockout-style tournament, even though it was optional. Excellent. There's an anonymous question on Slido. How would you determine the transferability of the skills learned through this process? The transferability of the skills from RoboViz to... I assume that the asker means the skills that the students are learning in the course of the game, how might that transfer out to additional tasks they might do? Yeah, I think this does transfer. It is sort of like more a specific type of situation where they're playing this game and it's not as real world. That's sort of like the trade-off that we've made. But I think that there's definitely a lot of variation in designs, and we also have them explain why they made their designs and show us like their process of what their decisions were over time. So we definitely get to evaluate that as well and see how those skills influence their decisions. Great. And then another question is, how do you ensure that students don't just reuse winning strategies from a prior year? That's a good question. They're not made public, like the winning strategies are not public. So that's one thing. But also the way that we set up the different data types and different potential strategies is that there's not really one best strategy. So teams can definitely like choose different strategies depending on what they think might be the best case scenario for what their team is interested in looking at and doing. Okay, thank you very much. Let's thank our speaker again. All right, our last talk in the session is entitled Relaxed Dot Plots, Faithful Visualization of Samples and Their Distribution, and Niels will be giving the presentation.
Okay, so hi, thanks for coming to this talk. I'm going to present a visualization technique that my co-authors and I developed. And I'd like to first talk about the goals of our work. So let's start with traditional dot plots, the type of unit visualization that also serves to show a distribution of values within one dimension in the underlying data. And they place dots in the exact position of the underlying value. Unless there is a collision where dots overlap, then they get stacked. This way, those dots also move away from their ideal position, and we'd like to reduce this error. Those traditional dot plots also don't scale well for high dynamic range data. So there's a nonlinear approach that scales those dots to make them smaller where the density is higher. This works well to preserve outliers and also preserves the linearity within each stack, which is very useful when you color those dots to also see relationships or the ratio between groups of different dots. In this example, we have monthly air temperature data, and we colored the dots according to the season. We can also see here that in areas of higher density, the shape gets quite ragged, which is similar to having kernel density estimation with a dynamic bandwidth that becomes too narrow. So we'd like to preserve this apparent bandwidth across the entire range to get a smoother shape. There's also the problem of moire effects, especially when you have lower resolutions. And this is caused by differently sized dots that are in close proximity to each other. The original paper used vertical blurring to get around this problem, but we'd like to retain those individually identifiable dots. So we have 3 goals in total: less error of the dot positions, a smoother shape of the plot to better represent the underlying distribution, and also less moire effects. So we start with kernel frequency estimation, which is similar to kernel density estimation. The main difference is that density estimation has a total area of 1 underneath the curve, and for frequency estimation, we use the area of 1 for each kernel, so the summed up curve corresponds to the number of data points. This gives us a rough shape where we can place individual dots more freely, so we don't have the old columns or stacks of dots. But close to the boundaries, the frequency of values gets close to 0, so there's not enough space to place all dots. We use a method from bounded kernel density estimation and just mirror those tails of the kernels back into the denser area. And so far, this would be enough for linear plots. But we also want to retain the advantages of nonlinear scaling. So the original equations use the number of dots in each column to scale their size. And we transferred that because we don't have regular columns anymore. Instead, our methods are based on a value frequency along the x-axis. Okay, so now we have a rough shape, both of the outer envelope of the plot and for the size of the dots. We can start now placing them. And we initialize a layout with the traditional sweep algorithm and then apply Lloyd relaxation to spread the dots out, fill out the envelope. But this goes against our goal of less error. So we customize the algorithm to move dots closer to their underlying position, or underlying data position. But again, Lloyd relaxation is not ideal because it doesn't allow dots to move past each other, so we added tunneling swaps, where we switch the position of pairs of dots to minimize the total error. Now there's a question, what is that total error? We don't want to measure it in pixels because the rendering resolution can change. In this example, we move both dots by the same amount, and we argue that the error is much more significant for the smaller dot. So we divide the offset by the dot size. And since we don't want to reduce the total error at the cost of individual dots, we also use the square of this error, because the highest error is what determines how faithful visualization is. Okay, so now let's apply our techniques to this previous example, and this is the result. There's much less moire effects, and the colors stay more constant across multiple resolutions. This is due to a blue noise property. So let's visualize this property with differential domain analysis to get a more objective view. Ideally, the result should be a dark spot in the center and an even distribution around it. As you can see, it's not ideal blue noise because we move the dots closer to their underlying data position. But compared to the previous result, there are much less vertical patterns. We can also compare against other techniques like the B-swarm plot or blue noise plot. Both are freely available in open source. Here in the B-swarm plot, we have only little moire effects, at least in this colored version. When we take away color, much more patterns become visible in this diagonal distribution. With the blue noise plot, the results are a bit different. About half the points get put in this arrangement close to the center, and that leads to a very dominant line in the DDA plot. We can also compare our results with the established error metric. Here in this example, it reduces the error of the positional error more than 95%. Another way of evaluating the results is through a crowdsourced user study, in our case with 100 participants. All tasks were in a form of 2 alternative forced choice, and we had the task difficulty and the plot type as independent variables, and then the ratio of correct answer as dependent variables. In the first task, we asked to read off the value of one highlighted dot. And we assumed, okay, the relaxed layout is more correct, but there are none of these helpful vertical lines to read off the value. So we expected the result to be worse. But statistical testing actually showed that there is no significant difference. So we'd say the relaxed layout is more correct and there are not significantly more errors in reading those values. The second task was about comparing the underlying value of 2 selected dots. We expected the relaxed layout to lead to more correct answers because of visible nuances. Statistical testing this time confirmed our hypothesis. In the last experiment, we took the original shape from kernel frequency estimation and deepened or filled in valleys. Then asked people to select this side of or this curve that most closely represented the plot in the center. We expected that the smooth shape from relaxed plots would better fit the original unchanged kernel frequency estimation. Again, the result was confirmed, and we suspect that the result comes from those ragged shapes from the columnar layout. They don't help perceive the actual depth of valleys. So in conclusion, we think the relaxed layout is better. We got a linear shape from kernel frequency estimation, added transfer using the underlying frequency, data frequency, to get a nonlinear shape, and used customized relaxation to spread the dots in there. Together, this gave us less error, a frequency that is perceived closer to the underlying, a shape that is closer to the underlying frequency, and less moire effects. You can get more details in the paper. It's open access, and for instance, we explain how we avoided leaning towers of dots. There's also open access supplemental material with math background and additional images, and you can get the open source code to try this GPU accelerated algorithm in your web browser. So thanks for your attention and for your time.
Okay, do we have questions for Niels? I think Wolfgang has one.
Thank you very much. Very nice work. Thank you for presenting it. The first question is already answered on the right side here. So the source code is available. The second question would be, is your method also applicable to techniques like this theme reverse dream graph technique, where you have a center line and streams that flow over time?
Yeah, I think it would be possible because you just have a different shape. In this case, we just used a straight axis on the bottom, but it's possible to just use the calculated height and just move it up to the center, have a centralized plot. And we already have those different kinds of groups of data where you saw the different colors, and we also don't mix them. So if you have different streams and they shouldn't intermix, that's also perfectly possible.
Other questions in the room? Okay, well, I have one or two. One thing I noticed is that as the number of dots increases, there seems to be some overplotting. Can you comment on the scalability?
So far, our example has 10,000 points. Works with much less, of course. In theory, it should work, the algorithm we have at least, up to the limit of your graphics hardware. It just takes a bit longer for pre-processing. Generally, the algorithm has, like, in some parts, close to a squared complexity, so it should work up to a certain point, but then again, since you have unit visualization, it's in itself a limit because it doesn't help you to see 100,000 data points and them being too small.
Great. And then another question I had was, all of your examples used circle marks, and I was curious how this might generalize to other mark types.
Interesting. Well, when we calculated the shape of the envelope, we didn't really use that knowledge that the individual glyphs would be circles, so it should work. And also, our implementation uses jump flooding, so it should work with any arbitrary shape. But then again, I can't guarantee that there won't be even more overplotting, at least at the edges. Since we use light relaxation and it calculates a Voronoi tessellation, there shouldn't be an issue where a dot is completely covered by another one. But some overlap on the edges is possible.
Great. I think we can sneak in one more from Slido. Is error really a problem in interpretation of these plots? The benefit of your nice layout approach seems much more about removing distracting artifacts.
I'd say yes. At least when you have large dots, this error is quite significant in my opinion, and especially when you have that outer shape. That's what I most noticed, that having a smooth representation helps you way better get a feel of the underlying distribution. And of course, artifacts are also a motivation, but I'd say all those goals are on the same level.
Okay, thank you. So this concludes our visualization opportunities session. Next up is lunch break, and don't forget the Viz Town Hall over in room OK4. Thanks, everybody.